right, welcome to Bitachon Blast number 2. Can everybody hear me and see me okay? And the title is, What Do You Rely On? And if you click on the chat box, you'll be able to comment if you have any questions or anything, and we'll try to give some time. We're just trying to blast off the week with some Bitachon, which is really important. So we're going off of the Sefer from our Usher Zeli Rubenstein Zatzal, and I'm going to go through one essay at a time. So if you want to follow along, you can, but I'm going to try to bring out some of the points and the stories, and I'll also leave you with a little bit of thought of Lag BaOmer as we prepare for that. All right, so Sha'ar Bitachon, the introduction to Sha'ar Bitachon, goes through 5 benefits that the Baal Bitachon gains from having Bitachon. So what are the 5? And some of them are a little bit repetitive. We'll go through some of them separately at a different time, but let's just go through the 5. So first of all, he has freedom from worries, and he has a blessing of a serene life. And Rav Asher used to always say, you can either learn Chovos Halvavos, or you could take lots of pills and alcohol and have lots of trouble. Now, that doesn't mean to say that people that learn Chovos Halvavos don't need to take medication either, or don't have challenges in life, but it just means that Bitachon is a good place to start for becoming a more calm person. Number 2 is he isn't dependent on people. And Rav Asher explained he doesn't have to dance to other people's tunes and flatter them. How could I say something in disapproval of my unethical actions of my boss? I need my paycheck. The Baal Bitachon realizes my boss doesn't feed me. Hashem does. And I follow Hashem's will. Now, again, people with Bitachon doesn't mean that they're not reasonable, but it just means that there's a certain tranquility that they get in their life, and they also start to become more independent and dependent on Hashem, which is the most important thing. Third thing is our Chavas Adas. They have a broadened outlook in life. They're free from some of their worries, again. And in this context, it's free to serve Hashem, which is the purpose of life. And number 4, he's happy with his lot in life, because someone that doesn't have Bitachon is always looking around and saying how everyone else has it better than them. And I've said many times as a mental health therapist that some of my most challenging clients are the ones that are atheists, because they believe that they've been dealt a bad hand and that it has no meaning and life has no meaning. And it's very hard to comfort people like that, because it's a circular thing where, according to them, nothing has a purpose. And finally, he's not influenced by money, because it doesn't mean anything to him, in the sense that, sure, I have to do my hishtadlus, but it doesn't sway me, because the Rebbeinu Shalom is one that gives me money. So the Chovos Halvavos himself writes, the great benefit the Boteach gets is menuchas hanefesh, tranquility, that he can rely and count on Hashem to meet his needs, just as a servant relies upon and knows that his master will not fail him. When a servant relies on his master, he has no worries. And that's us. We're the servant. And we were in Mitzrayim, and we learned how to be slaves. And when we became free, we were avadim of Hashem. That was the purpose of Yetzias Mitzrayim. It wasn't so that we're now free. We're Elecha ben Chorin al Imisha, so we learn we serve Hashem. The Chovos Halvavos writes, by default, if one is not actively relying on Hashem, he's relying on something else. We all look for security. Just like before COVID days, when you used to go to a wedding, you would look around for people that you know, and then you'd kind of feel relieved when you find other people there. Well, in life, we're all looking for things that we can rely on. And people would say, wow, it's so great. My boss is wonderful. He always pays me. So we're always looking to rely on something. Now, it doesn't mean that you tell your boss, now that I learned Chovos Halvavos, I don't rely on you and you're worthless. It just means it's a recognition that he's a shliach of Hashem. And for certain phrases in the Chovos Halvavos, this is probably the number 1 phrase of the entire Sha'ar Bitachon from the Chovos Halvavos. Rav Asher said them in Hebrew and said them many times. And this is a very, very scary line. And Rav Asher told all of us Talmidim this, and the Ramban in Parshas Bo that we all have to know by heart. Well, that one will be for a different time. But Misha Boteach Bezulas Hashem, if you believe in anything outside of Hashem, what happens? By default, by Mida Keneged Mida, Meiser Elokim Ashkechaso Me'alav, Hashem removes his watching upon you from away from you. Meniach Oso Biyad Misha Batach Alav, and he puts it in the hand of the one that you're relying on. You want to rely on someone else? Good luck to you. So these words are very, very scary and very, very powerful, but that's what it is. When we rely on Hashem, then the Mida Keneged Mida is that we get our Hashem is the one that takes care of us. But when we rely on other things, then Hashem says, okay, well, good luck with that other person. Rav Asher talked about his brother, Rav Yosef Rubenstein, who was someone that studied a lot of Sha'ar Bitachon and actually wanted to write a sefer on Sha'ar Bitachon. And so one of the things that I wrote was that even though he passed away before he was able to do it, Rav Asher really felt very strongly about bringing the sefer out, and happy to have had a hand in that. And many people say that when they learn Bitachon, their life changes. There's a famous story about a guy trying to find a parking spot. It's kind of a joke. But it's a famous one. And Rav Usher actually told over the positive part of the story that happened to him. So the joke is well known. There's a guy trying to find a parking spot in Manhattan, and everyone knows that that's one of the hardest places to find a parking spot. And he's frustrated. He davens to Hashem, please, 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 give me a spot, give me a spot. Finally, he drives around the block frantically. Someone pulls out right in front of him, leaves him a spot. He parks in. He looks up and he says, "Thanks anyway, God, I found it." So he lost the whole point. Whereas Rav Usher told over a personal story about himself that he was driving to Manhattan to spend Shabbos with his parents when he was young, and he davened to Hashem to help him find a spot one Friday afternoon. Couldn't find a meter, couldn't find anything. And so he needed a place where he could put his car the entire Shabbos. As I pulled up, a spot opened up in that very moment. I looked up and I thanked Hashem profusely. So that's the contrast. If we're looking for ways around, there's always ways around. Like the Chinuch says, Sefer HaChinuch says, that whenever Hashem does a miracle, there's always a way out. So because he does things through teva. So when the Yam Suf was split, so it says that Hashem brought a strong wind, and there are scientists that write that wind is what maybe split it, or that Moshe's stick was made out of sapphire, and sapphire displaces water, and somehow that split the Yam into 12 things and specifically collapsed it exactly on the Egyptians. But if you don't want to believe, you don't want to believe. One of my favorite stories is from Rezev Leff, where he talks about the original Russian cosmonauts. So when they went up to space, they were all atheists, and Mother Russia believed in atheism, etc. And they went up to space, and they came back down, and they said, "Now we have proof there's no God." I looked, and I didn't see God up there. Whereas the other astronauts from the American side, who had more religious freedom, they went up there, and they were in awe, and they started spontaneously reciting verses from the Bible. They said, "Bereshis bara Elokim," God created in the beginning, right? So what's the difference? The difference is that if you go up with an attitude that I'm going to prove there's no God, then anything you see in front of you is going to prove there's no God. But if you go up with an attitude of I believe in God, then you're going to see Hashem all around you. Okay, so that's a very important thing. So someone asked Rav Usher, what does that mean that Hashem removes his hashgacha from you? Isn't he in charge of everything? So the answer is yes, of course he's in charge, but he follows your actions. When you turn away from him, then the pasuk says explicitly in Vayikra 26, if you turn away, then I turn away from you. In the Klala, it's this week's parsha. If you're a Bateach and a rich person, that person could lose all of his money in a moment. If someone says, I don't have to learn Shar Bitachon, I have a rich father or father-in-law or a good job. So unfortunately, we know the stories many times that doesn't get us anywhere. And so one of the most important things of life, in order to feel satisfied and taken care of by Hashem, is to be aware that Hashem is always watching us. I continue with another story, and then I'm going to leave off with one thought about Rabbi Akiva. So one small spark is by Yechiel Spiro. He was a Telzer, just like Rav Usher. His father actually was friends with Rav Usher and remembered him from Tel's days and said he was a tremendous Mosbid. And so Yechiel Spiro has a nice Jewish heart. So I want to tell you a story from him about Bitachon, and I want to kind of break it down in a couple of different levels like I did last week as well. Rabbi Yamin's journey from Hungary to Bnei Brak was a memorable one. Until 1944, the Hungarians were one of the last impacted by the Germans because of their safety, but they were largely unaware of the horrors taking place not far from them, the decimating of the Jews of Poland and most of Eastern Europe. Still, the Hungarian Jews had their own problems to contend with. One day, representatives from the Hungarian army announced that 50 young men from the community were being drafted and must show up, and they were prepared with a list of which young men they wanted. Joining the Hungarian army meant exposing yourself to horrible hatreds and lots of threats to your own life. So what happened was there was one doctor who was known to find exemptions by declaring young men physically unable to serve as long as the price was right. He was a Hungarian doctor who was not Jewish, and you were able to bribe him. So the Russia Akal, the people in charge, turned to two of the most generous benefactors in the community and asked if they would provide the money to bribe the doctor. Since their own two sons were among the 50 draftees, these two philanthropists quickly, happily agreed to cover the costs. Money in hand, the Russia Akal approached the doctor. This was not the first time that they facilitated these exemptions, and they both already knew the exact way to do it. The greedy official agreed and said, no problem, this is Hungary and we could be bribed. However, since all eyes were on him, he thought about it and he said, I have to be very careful and it has to be legitimate, because if I can't write off someone for a good reason, then I'm going to get in trouble, but I'll try my best to write everybody off. Over the course of 2 days, a physician examined all 50 boys after he was paid. He managed to provide 48 exemptions based on physical weakness. However, 2 of the boys simply could not be called weak no matter what, no matter how he stretched the truth. He was worried that if the authorities double-checked his work, they would not allow any more exemptions from him, and the whole plan would backfire, and he'd be killed, and everyone would be conscripted anyway. When the doctor handed in the list, the Askanim turned white. The 2 boys who had not been exempt were the 2 children of the exact 2 donors. To their credit, the generous families didn't flinch. They didn't question Hashem as to why the children of only these two families who were sponsoring the entire venture were forced to serve in the army. Instead, they looked for another way out. They got in touch with people in the smuggling business to whisk these two young men out of the country. Once more, of course, the price had to be right, but what choice did they have? With broken hearts, the parents packed up 2 small suitcases and some provisions for the way and said their goodbyes. And just like that, their sons were gone for good. Tragically, all 48 who were given exemptions were ultimately murdered in Auschwitz because they had been killed with the rest of Hungarian Jewry. One of the 2 boys was Benjamin Deutsch. His parents had been tremendous Askanim and rich people, and they shipped him off to Israel. He was the only 2 of the 2 people to survive. Rabbi Benjamin Deutsch made his way to Bnei Brak, where he became a Rav Yosef Shlomo Kahneman's right-hand man in Yeshivas Panovich and Batei Avos. His Erlikite and his Yashar set him apart. So the bottom line is that the thing that looked like it was tragic and was destroying his life was ultimately the matter that actually kept him alive. And if you look at the Bitachon of the people that here they had given all this money, and yet all of a sudden they're rejected, and their own 2 sons are the 2 that have to go to the army, and that forced them to actually help their sons live. Tragedy, with so much loss, but a tremendous hashkachas Hashem, where the exact action that they took to be able to save their children is ultimately their chesed is what ended up saving their own 2 children. I want to leave off with a couple of quick thoughts about Rabbi Akiva. Since we are coming on to Lag BaOmer, you might be wondering what Rabbi Akiva has to do with Lag BaOmer. So there's a lot of things that Rabbi Akiva has to do with Lag BaOmer, but one of the most important things that he has to do with Lag BaOmer is that we know that his 24,000 Talmidim all died during the Sfiras HaOmer time, and that specifically it was on Lag BaOmer that they stopped dying. There's many questions as to why they stopped dying then. One of the things is that Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim were taught the most important thing that Rabbi Akiva had to teach, which we know his most famous mimer was probably one of his top 3 most famous, probably the most famous one, was the idea of Ihasel Reach Kamocha, of treating everybody properly. And so who more than his Talmidim will be held accountable for not treating each other properly? But it was specifically on Lag BaOmer where that death stopped happening. So Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim were very, very fundamental. More than that, Lag BaOmer is also a celebration of Rabbi Akiva as one of his only 5 Talmidim that actually survived. Rishon Bar Yochai. Rishon Bar Yochai passed away on Lag BaOmer most probably, and it was the day that was known as Hilula de Rashbi, which is translated as the praise, but also the teachings of Rashbi, because specifically on the day that he died, everyone learned his stuff, and his words became a lot more famous. So there's some fascinating things about Rabbi Akiva. One of them has to do with Bitachon, and that is, here you have a man who's a Rabbi Akiva. Last week I spoke about the story of Nachum Ish Gamzu. Nachum Ish Gamzu, anything that happened, he said Gamzu Latova, and I pointed out that Gamzu Latova is a very fascinating statement, because when you say this too is for the good, that has an implication that, what do you mean this too? What are you referring to? This also, right? If I say this is for the good, that means that the thing in front of me is good. But if I say this too, that means that I have a list of things that have already worked out. And so what I said was that a lot of bitachon has to do with recognizing that just as Hashem took care of me in the past, so too will take care of me in the future. And when we sit at the time of Pesach and we talk about Yetzias Mitzrayim, we recognize all the good that Hashem has done, and we continue to understand that Hashem will continue to take care of us, even though things are bleak, because we don't know how things are going to look and how things are going to be in the future. And Akiva's Rebbe was Nachum Ish Gamzu. So he certainly got a big dose of that bitachon in his life. And he was taught to always believe in Hashem and understand that Hashem is running the world. And even after his 24,000 Talmidim all died, so Baboker Zara Zaracha, when in your youth you should plant, but Ba'erev Al Tanach Yedecha, you should never give up. And so Akiva got 5 more Talmidim, and they ultimately became Rishon Bar Yochai, Rav Yossi, the leaders of Klal Yisrael, literally, that Mishnayos, Tosefta, Sifri, Sifra, everything is under them. Makul Maliv to Akiva. Akiva is the one who everything came from him. There's some fascinating things about Akiva. Akiva was a son of was Ben Gerim. He was a convert. Not only was a convert, he was married to Rachel, his most famous wife. He was actually married 3 times, which is not for now, right now, but his first wife seemed to have died, and Rachel, his wife, also died. She's not buried next to him, but she's buried in his same vicinity. If you've ever been to Eretz Yisrael, to his kever. She was the famous daughter of Kalba Savua that probably made him into who he was, and he was married to Tornis Rufus' wife. But that's not for now. The point is that he was a Ben Gerim. There's something very significant about that. When Akiva started to learn, it says that he had such a hatred for Talmidei Chachamim that he would say, "Find me a Talmid Chacham and I'll bite him like a donkey." And the Gemara explains that the reason he said donkey was because donkey's teeth sink into your skin more, and when you try to remove them, they pull and they break your bone too. So he was very, very brutal. But what's very fascinating is something that I find in the bitachon world as well, and that is that the more vehemently people fight against it and say it's not true, I don't understand it, and they ask questions, that's passion. That's okay. You're allowed to be passionate. The more, if you're intellectually honest, the more you come to it. And so what Rachel Ashes Rekiva saw in him, the Gemara says in Ksuba, she saw that he was snia umali, that he was appropriate, he was modest, and he had an enlightenment. He had a benefit to him. Umali, he had something good about him. What was that good part? I'm suggesting that good part that he had was the idea that he was passionate. So when he fought against something Chacham, he fought passionately. But when he joined them passionately. And it's the same thing. People that learn Bitachon, when they fight against it passionately, but they do it with intellectual honesty, they'll end up coming to a very, very strong, passionate understanding. Anyway, so we're Akiva. So Akiva became literally the leader of all of Torah Sheba'al Peh. And it's very fascinating because Akiva was 40 years old when he started learning, and he was embarrassed to go learn. And the famous Midrashim tell us that his wife taught him how to not be embarrassed. I'll skip that story for now. But what's fascinating is the Gemara in Shabbos, you'll get to Daf Yomi, it's on Daf Kuf Daled Amud Beis, in Parak HaBoneh. So it tells the story of the students who were learning, these little children, the Talmidim, they were learning, and they started darshaning all these brilliant things based on the Psukim. And the Mefarshim there explain that these students were actually little kids, like kindergarten kids, who they happened to have a little boy in their class, or an old man, a 40-year-old man in their class named Akiva. And that was specifically what was being darshaned here. And what's most fascinating is that the chazals that we have from Akiva, first of all, a lot of them have to do with Bitachon, which we know the famous story at the end of Brachos, that Kol Ma'ad Avar Rachman L'Tavad Avid, which is what he used to say, and his rooster died, and his light died. We'll save that for a different time. That'll come up, Bezer Hashem, in our Bitachon. But what's fascinating about Akiva is that specifically he wrote Osios to Akiva, which is a Kabbalistic work and Midrashim, which explains the letters. And Akiva goes back to the basics. He literally darshans the letters, and like Chazal say in the Gemara Menachos, he darshaned the Tagim as well, that so much so that when Moshe himself saw him, he said, why don't you give the Torah through him? But if you think about it, there's something very fascinating about him. So Akiva, very fascinatingly, he's the one, with all of his broken life and his 40 years of not believing and wanting to hate Talmid Chacham, he's the one that became literally the father of all Torah Sheba'al Peh. Why is that? Well, what's fascinating is that the parak that talks about his joining these kids and getting rid of his embarrassment, Alti Baishan Lomed, is in Parak HaBoneh. Boneh means building. When you learn Torah with the letters, that's how you build. But what's fascinating is that the story of Maimed Har Sinai, which is very famously in Masechah Shabbos, and that's a whole discussion in itself why it's in Shabbos, because Shabbos is a time of Bitachon, and Kabbalah Satorah builds Bitachon. But that whole story is in Parak Amar Rav Akiva. It's on Pei Ches, and it's in Parak Amar Rav Akiva. If you take a look in the Gemara, you'll see it's the parak called Amar Rav Akiva. So Akiva is the founder of all of Torah, and he is a convert, which is very interesting because Moshe, the whole parsha of Kabbalah Satorah is found in Parshas Yisro, who is also a convert, and that's Moshe's father-in-law, and that's Moshe's entire connection with him. And Moshe Moshe connects with the Torah that way as well. And Akiva was also a convert. So what does that mean? It means that people who are in dark places, that they converted, they live with Tumah, they're the ones who are able to see the Kedusha. And that's why we find in Parak Shira, the song that the donkey says, which is what Rabbi Akiva described himself as, Anashcheno kechamor, I want to be like a donkey, is specifically L'cha Hashem HaGedula v'Gevura. It's the most Kabbalistic verse that Chazal tell us is the Spheros. L'cha Hashem HaGedula v'Gevura v'Tiferes v'Netzach v'Hod Yichol Hashemay v'Aretz L'cha Hashem Mlacha v'Mesach Rosh. That's the point of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva brings out the donkey. We know that Mashiach comes ani v'rochev al chamor, and so the idea of Rabbi Akiva is that he is Mekadesh, even the darkest places in the world, he brings light there. And that's the whole idea of what we're trying to do during this time of Sfiras Omer, during this time of Lag BaOmer. Lag BaOmer is a time that's Mesugel for Tefillah, because it was a day that a big plague stopped. It was a day that a plague stopped because everyone stopped dying. And it was the Bitachon that Klal Yisrael had that changed around the entire situation, where people recognize that, hey, there's a horrible thing happening, and it's because of our actions, and that everything is caused because of Torah. And that man who would bite people like a donkey became the one who was Mekadesh Shem Shemayim, with the ultimate way that he could do that. And that's the greatness that Akiva brought. And he was a man who who his entire being was one of Kol Ma'adav Rochon L'Tavud Avad and V'Hasel Rechak Mocha. That's ultimately what created the Kedusha of Klal Yisrael. And if you look at the story of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, you'll certainly find that as well, that his understanding of life was all about learning Torah and connecting to Hashem. And so it's interesting that all the parshas are also Bahar B'Chukosai, which is Ma Inyan Sinai Eitzel Har Sinai, right? Ma Inyan Shemitah Eitzel Har Sinai. That's a recognition of that Hashem is in charge. When a person has Bitachon, it changes your entire life. And I hope that we should be zocha to take all the lessons of Bitachon and to look at the tranquility of our life to be able to be confident in our own lives. And I want to leave off with one last story because this is Rav Asher's Torah, and he used to always tell us, it's a Medrash Rabbah at the end of Parshas Pekudei, that Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, he had a Talmud that went to Chutz La'aretz and became very rich. And when he came back, he was showing off, he was a rich man, and the Talmidim were all jealous of him. And so the Medrash says that Rav Shimon Bar Yochai recognized that his students were getting distracted by material wealth, and so he took them all out to the valley. And those who know Rav Asher remember him telling the story well, but he would read the story from the Medrash, and he would say, "Bika, bika, male dinner zav." He would say, "Valley, valley, fill up with gold." And all of a sudden, remember, he was a Kabbalist. He's the one that basically brought down the Zohar, right? So Rav Shimon Bar Yochai filled up the entire valley with gold, and he said, "Im zav atam rotzim, if you want gold, take it. It's all yours." And his students looked and thought to themselves, "Oh my gosh, this is crazy." And then he said, "But just know one thing, that if you take it now, that's your Olam Haba." And the Medrash doesn't say what happened. We can only imagine what happened. But there's a Yalkut Shmoni that does say what happened. And the Yalkut Shmoni says explicitly that no one touched it. You're a Talmud of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, and you see something like that, then fine. So when I wrote this down in a footnote later on, someone called me and said, "So where's all the money?" So I would imagine it disappeared. But anyway, the point is that Rav Shimon Bar Yochai teaches us to put our priorities where they belong. And our bitachon in Hashem means that Hashem, I rely on you. Of course, I do my hishtalus because that's part of what you've told me to do. But I rely on you, and I believe that everything that I need, you'll take care of. And those are the lessons that the Vilna Gaon writes in Mishlei, that the entire Torah is all about bitachon. And the Rabbeinu Bachya says this a few times throughout the Torah as well. What does that mean throughout his Pirush? What does that mean? That means that the whole purpose of the Torah, sure, there's lots of mitzvahs that we do, but it's a recognition that Hashem is in charge, Hashem is watching over everything we do. So we should take this time period of Lag BaOmer and Sfiras Omer, which is Mesugal, to end a Magefa, and we should use it as a time of tefillah and recognizing that Hashem guides every single part of our life. And things that go our way, great, we should enjoy them and rejoice. And things that are challenging and we don't understand, we have a very myopic view. We should recognize that the Ribono Shalom is in charge, and we should be zocha to have a great Lag BaOmer. Thank you so much for joining, and I wish you a good night, and I hope this blast will carry you through the week. Take care.